Just a few questions concerning lesson 2. I want you back. Some of the things that stood out for me, some of these questions, we ask God to help us to get answers for these questions. I want you back. Now, if it is that God wants us back, then where are we now and where are we supposed to be? Okay? And why aren't we there? Is there anything that we need to do or can do to get to that place? Or is there something God has done or is doing to help us to get to that place? Now, why should we be urged to return? What happens if we don't return? Can we look at an ideal situation, that ideal place? Because if we're there, then is it an ideal place? What's the delta between where we are supposed to be and where we are now? All right. The what do you think section of the lesson gives us various scenarios and asks us to rate them 1 to 10. Which one is bad and so on. I think that each situation could be bad in its own right. Different people have different tolerances for loss and things of that nature. And if we look at it, for example, your grandfather dies. If the grandfather is the person who is closest to you, that could be really devastating. If the grandfather is the person who is supporting the family, that could be devastating. You understand? So each of these can be bad in its own right. Now, one of the things that is interesting is the use of the name Joshua. Who is the Joshua in the story? Is that Joshua a representation of Jesus? Is that Joshua the same Joshua that is from Deuteronomy and the whole Exodus experience there? Is that the same Joshua? And the answer is no, it's not. Okay? Can leave a link for you. gotquestions.org. Who was this Joshua in Zechariah 3 verses 1 to 10? And we find out really that it's just another high priest with the name Joshua. Another thing, what is a mitre? Okay? And it says, what is this mitre that was set on his head? And if we Google it, we find out that it's a type of headdress that is worn by priests and so on. Now, let's compare. The story asks us to make a comparison between the garments that Joshua had on and make a comparison with Adam and Eve. We can do that. If we look at that, we can see that Joshua has filthy rags or filthy garments, and then they were made clean. Adam and Eve had a covering of light, and they lost that. When they lost that, they were then given aprons of skin. Both eventually were in a state of shame, okay? Because a priest having filthy rags, that's a total no-no. Because as a priest, they were supposed to be pure, right? And we can see that fact in the story of the Good Samaritan, where he would not touch somebody that he thought could be dead, because that would mean that he would be unclean, okay? And eventually, in both scenarios, we're going to need some form of restoration to get us back to where we need to be. So the picture of the garment, what does it mean? Does it suggest our righteousness? How our righteousness is? There is a famous saying that our righteousness is as filthy rags. All right? What did God want? He wanted pure vestments. God wants us to be clean, and he says in Matthew, be perfect even as I am perfect. Okay, so dirty clothes and priests don't go together. God promises are conditional. So he says, on the one hand, choose to obey, and then blessings will follow. You'll be the head, not the tail. Your barns will be filled, your basket and your store and all of that. Your children will, have many children and so on. If you choose to disobey, then you're no longer the head, but the tail. The land is not going to bear. The women of the land are not going to be fertile, and the list goes on and on. But interesting in that is that God is making this appeal for us to come back to that point, to be in a right relationship with Him, so that we can be blessed. If we obey, then we receive the blessings of obedience. If we disobey, we receive the curses of disobedience. Now, if you guys can think of anything else that caught your attention or stood out to you, drop it in the comment section below so that we can continue our discussion on this week's lesson. Take care. See you in our next episode.